Robinson, and as Vice President of Philanthropic Advancement of Foundation for the Carolinas, I lead our Center for Nonprofit Sustainability and our Center for Corporate Philanthropy. Together with E4E Relief, we are very happy to have Chris Jarvis of the Realized Worth Institute with us to share insights from their 2020 technology review. Today's session is being recorded, and we will share the recording and a slide presentation with you all later. If possible, please leave your cameras on. We definitely prefer to see you, but again, we understand if you have to turn your camera off for whatever reason. Sometimes this can be for a clearer or more stable video feed. If you have questions during the program, please feel free to enter them in the chat, and we will do our best to address them. We also have a Q&A segment towards the end. Working with corporations engaged in philanthropic efforts, we receive a lot of questions as it relates to different technological platforms, whether it be corporate matching gift programs, tracking employee volunteerism, or even facilitating employee giving. So both of us, FFTC and E4E Relief, jumped at the chance to partner with the RW Institute and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to sponsor their most recent technology review and to provide key information about technology solutions to our corporate relationships and to give you all the opportunity to be a part of the process and to be reflected in the data. Before moving into the program, because we have a mix of relationships with us today between FFTC and E4E Relief, we wanted to give a brief overview of our organizations for those of you who may not be as familiar with us or one of us. As I just mentioned, I'm with FFTC, and we also have Julie Caldwell representing E4E Relief. Foundation for the Carolinas was established over 60 years ago and is currently the 6th largest community foundation in the country, with about 3.1 billion assets under management. As a full service center of philanthropy, we work with individuals, nonprofits, and corporations to support their charitable aims through fund management, offering back office support and diversified investment platform, philanthropic guidance, so assisting with complex assets like closely held business interest or real estate, and then identifying and addressing key community issues and convening key community partners. We work with businesses of all sizes, developing philanthropic strategies, talking through ideas to engage employees and a company's charitable mission, and then also working to manage corporate donor advised funds that focus on both financial and charitable goals. One of the ways that we help to grow philanthropic partnerships, meaning leveraging leadership networks, organizing stakeholders, and encouraging inclusiveness and broader participation, is through an affinity group in our Center for Corporate Philanthropy called CCAP, which stands for Charlotte Community Affairs Professionals. This group of about 30 companies, represented by about 60 individual members, come together to share information related to CSR initiatives and best practices, CSR being corporate social responsibility, to learn about important trends in the industry, but ultimately to network among peers and to be actively engaged corporate citizens in our community. Here's a quick snapshot of the companies represented in CCAP. They're not all headquartered in Charlotte, but some have some presence in the region. If you would like to know more about FFTC, our Center for Corporate Philanthropy, or CCAP, please don't hesitate to let us know. Our contact information is included at the end of the slide deck, which again, we'll send out to you. I will now pass it over to Julie Caldwell with E4E Relief. And I'll note that E4E Relief was actually born out of FFTC's Center for Corporate Philanthropy and is currently a subsidiary of Foundation for the Carolinas. Julie?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to have this group together today. As Deviri said, yes, we were born out of Foundation for the Carolinas and have been providing disaster and hardship relief on behalf of corporations for the past 20 years. So back in the day, it was a department, and at the time, Wachovia, which those of you that are in the region are familiar with, now Wells Fargo, unfortunately was impacted by 9/11, and that was our first opportunity to provide grants to those employees that were impacted by that tragedy. to provide them financial grants to help them move forward after that disaster. And from then, we've been helping companies all throughout the globe support their employees. So an employee relief program is really set up at a company level, and the company decides how they want to support their employees. And we receive donations coming in from fellow employees, so peer-to-peer engagement, and then also corporations and foundations donating into those funds. And then when an event happens, whether that be a natural disaster or someone is in an accident or even domestic violence, then that employee can apply for a grant. And it's really tailored to what the company's needs and desires are. So we feel very fortunate to have been born out of Foundation for the Carolinas and continue to do this great work. I've had the opportunity to personally talk with hundreds of companies throughout the United States about their needs for their employee base. Typically, we are looking at companies that have a couple thousand to hundreds of thousands of employees across all different industries, but really it boils down to ensuring that there's a readiness plan in place. So when I talk to those companies, they talk about the vulnerabilities of their employee base, which may be we've got hundreds of people in one location, and that location is in Florida or Texas or California, and getting hit time and time again with wildfires and hurricanes and so forth. And as we know, that's going to continue to be something that doesn't go away from a disaster standpoint. Or they're concerned, they're concerned about the vulnerabilities of their employees that, as we know, a broad majority of Americans have less than $400 in their savings. So if they have that car accident or if their child gets sick unexpectedly, that is true devastation for that employee. And as we fast forward into COVID, that conversation has shifted into how do we support our employees that are directly impacted by COVID? So in working with these 5 million employees across the world whose companies have a program with us, we're so fortunate to be able to extend that company's support for their employee base. Devira, if you flip to the next slide, this is just a quick snapshot of some of the companies that we work with. Many of you are on the phone today, and as you can see, it's across all industries, size of companies, but again, coming back to the best way to support those employees. As we think through those partnerships, flip to the next slide would be great, thank you. We thought that it's really important to recognize that through all of that power of giving and collective good, that these companies, we've had 190,000 applications come in from employees over the past 5 years for needs. Companies, foundations, individual employees have donated over $279 million into their employee relief programs, and we've granted out over $152 million in grants. So when you think about that magnitude, when we were last year, when we learned about the Realized Worth and Bill and Melinda Gates partnering together for the inaugural tech review, we found it to be a really great resource for our clients and future clients, for them to be able to basically allow the heavy lift to happen by the RW Institute to go through this vast space of volunteering, giving, and grants technology. We work with a lot of those corporations because, as you can imagine, those technology organizations will feature their employee relief program within the company as a nonprofit that employees can donate into. So we know firsthand how powerful these technology tools can be in engaging employees in volunteerism and giving and in grants. And so we're thrilled to have Chris here today. And I'm so pleased to introduce Chris Jarvis, and I'll hand it over to him. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Devira, and thank you to the teams at E4E and Foundation for the Carolinas. It's great to be with you here today. Let's kick it off and get everybody active. I can see a lot of really fancy, wonderful photos with your name. I would love to see your
face, if that's okay. So that would mean turning on your video and then open up your chat. Okay, so at the bottom, because you're going to have tons of questions. Lois, you're amazing for doing this. Terry, same. Davis, awesome. Michael, phenomenal. Down at the bottom, you see a little bubble. It says chat. click on the chat. You're going to see a screen open to the right. If the screen opens right in front of you and you're like, this is the stupidest thing ever, it is. Go to the top left-hand corner in the red, yellow, green buttons, minimize your screen, and your chat will fall in line just over to the right. Because I'm going to ask you questions. You're going to have questions. We're going to have answers. But the first thing we're going to do, and remember, E4E is giving out a free iPad. I'm lying at the end of this for everybody who participates. So the most engaged person on this will have a name draw for an iPad. I'm lying. So in order to win that iPad, which is fake, make sure that you go over and put your name, where you're calling in from, and the organization you're with. Do you mind doing that? Because during a pandemic, we all get isolated and alone, and the world gets very small. So this is your opportunity to remember you're not alone. Your office in your garage is not your world. Life is bigger. And this is the way to prove that. Okay, so Julie Caldwell, E4E Relief, and she is in, where are you, Julie? I'm gonna pick on you. You have to say where you're from.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
You're in Charlotte, North Carolina. Can you guys hear me okay? Because all of a sudden, when you said that, Julie, it was weirdly, okay, hold on a second here. This has actually never happened before. I have not had to, I've lost my headphones. So you're hearing me audibly, which is terrible. So keep doing that. I'm going to try and connect these things. Oh my goodness, this is just so embarrassing. This never ever happens. I'm not a pro. Okay, so I'm turning my Bluetooth off. I'm turning my Bluetooth on. Okay, for double points, if you want to put, early on I put my URL for my LinkedIn. If you want to put that in, we're not going to spam you or anything like, well, I'm not going to, E4E might, but I'm not going to spam you. We're not going to spam you. But if you guys want to get connected to each other, because there are cool people like Beth Lubin on this, and you want to know who she is and where she is. So how do I get this to connect? I don't know. I think I have to press this button. Okay, hold on. I have to hold it next to my Mac. It is connecting. It is connecting.
And we can hear you fine, Chris.
Yeah, I know, but it's just through the speaker headphones, and I don't much care for that. Okay, so I don't think it's going to work. So that's too bad. Let's see if one more thing here. We practiced yesterday for a couple hours before we got on, and this just did not happen. So I'm going to turn it off one more time. I'm going to turn this on one more time. The new Macs, you can't just go and get a set of headphones and plug them in either. It's like, do it this way or not at all. Okay. Yeah, it's a good thing it's not trash day. You're absolutely right, Beth Lubin. She understands Fells Point. I'm calling in from Fells Point in Baltimore. My name is Chris Jarvis. We're going to do it this way, and that's okay. I work with Realize Worth. That's the firm we work with. We work with companies on their employee giving and volunteering programs. We help design them. Some of you are on the call. We've worked with your companies. That's cool that you're on this call. I'm representing the RW Institute on this call, and that is sort of a think tank where we're looking to bring research and science together with the practice of mobilizing people to get involved in communities, to volunteer, to workplace giving, that kind of thing. And then further, can we connect them to things like DEI? What does it look like when people change the perspective of those people and their problems, and we become more integrated, when we again believe in what the company wants to achieve and line up with that? So all of that kind of cool stuff, that's what we do on the RW Institute side. And as part of that, we wanted to look at one of the, as Julia mentioned, one of the key mechanisms to deliver good into the community that companies are using today are technology platforms. Okay, so first question for that iPad, which is fake. The biggest investment in a technology platform to date, how much money? Go ahead and put that in the chat box. And I'll be looking for that. How much money? And E4E and Foundation for the Carolinas, you guys cannot put your answer in, okay? So go ahead and put that answer in. You need the technology platform and the amount. Anybody. Anytime. At any point. Everybody's thinking, this sounds like a trick question, or why would I know that? Like, what is going on that I would know what equity firm is investing. Okay, cyber grants, 2 million. Melissa Buchanan. Is that your final answer? Because it's not right. So I'm now nobody's going to say anything. Okay, yes, Mika, billion. Who got the billion, Mika? You have to write that in too. I had to play your game. Miss Buchanan is a good sport. She's been Salesforce, 1 billion. Okay, so Salesforce got bought. Salesforce Philanthropy Cloud developed a platform. Salesforce developed a platform called Salesforce Philanthropy Cloud in partnership with the United Way. Salesforce turned around and bought their own platform for $330 million a couple of years ago. So now that foundation is owned by Salesforce, and that platform is part of the Salesforce suite. I'm talking about a recent investment of $1.1 billion in Benevity just a few months ago. They're worth over $1 billion. Now, Blackbaud has held the position of being $1 billion industry for quite some time, but they've got a whole suite of softwares, like everything. If you've ever been to their conference, they do everything. This is a one solution for companies to help them give and volunteer in partnership and grant making with their employees. And what's really interesting about that, and we're going to get started here in a second, is that we were talking to them back in 2010. We flew to Calgary, and there were 10 people in an office in the back room of a nothing building. They had done a handful of fundraising for some friends and family, stressed out, how are we ever going to make this work? And they went from there, and within a decade went from being worth like zero to being worth $1 billion. This industry is just getting started. It is nowhere near its peak. There's a lot of dollars to be made by these platforms, and more so, and maybe more on point, there's a lot more to be done through these platforms. And that's what why we started this this review, is we wanted people to understand there's not just the first 3 names that come up when you do a Google search, and all the functionality is not the same. And when you do a demo and they say, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, they don't mean what you think they mean. And the process doesn't take as long as you think. And the technology platform may actually slow down your giving program rather than speed it up for a period of time. And. So we reached out to the Gates Foundation, and we produced the 2019 version. This time around, we are lucky enough to be working with the Foundation for the Carolinas and E4E Relief, as well as some others, in bringing this new 2020 version to you. And really, the point is to help these CSR professionals and practitioners find the right tool so that more people can get involved in the community, more money can go to the community, and more of what's intended by these platforms can actually happen. So that means vendors have to know what other vendors are doing and what innovation looks like, rather than just reproducing the same wheel over and over again. Practitioners need to know which version fits their program. And then we all need to know, what do employees experience when they do this, and why do they use it, and why don't they use it? So that is all in this report. It's absolutely free. This is about, we figured, we calculated it would cost about $85,000 to produce this report if a company wanted to do it. That is actually not a bad investment, but it is free for everybody and all around the world. And this next one, we're very excited about it. You're going to see the first part of our findings, and we're going to talk together what that might mean. If you've got any questions about what this report is, why it is happening, anything along those lines, anything that you hear me say, I'm going to try and keep stopping as we go through this. Write it in the chat. I've got the chat right here, and I've got my colleague from Realize Worth on the call as well, and she is monitoring the chat, making notes. You can say whatever you want. It's totally safe space, and we will. I'll be checking in with her to make sure we don't miss anything. But thank you, everybody. So far, put your name in, where you're calling in from, what you're doing there, your LinkedIn profile. That's very cool. Classy group. Love it. Here we go. So we're going to look at the highlights from the 2019 edition. This sort of sets the stage for how to do a bit of a compare and contrast. And then we're going to dive into some of our initial findings of the 2020 edition. So in the first version, we reached out to 51 known solution providers around the world. Now, at the time, you might be thinking, 51, that's not too many. At the time, most people thought there was maybe 10. We did a rough survey. How many technologies are available to help with employee giving and volunteering? It's a pretty small sandbox that we're talking about playing in. How many practitioners do this? How many people have a job in this? Up until a couple of years ago, there was no even formal education around this. So we thought 51 was a lot, and it is a lot. There was 13 countries, 5 continents. We surveyed 60 practitioners, 56 companies across 7 countries. These are CSR managers, a bit like some of the folks on this call, like Miss Buchanan. I think so, right? Okay, so she's still in the saddle there. 183 end users across 50 companies in 13 countries. This was our first survey. We were trying to figure this out, and we did this one a little late. We want a lot more feedback from the end users, and so you see our new targets around that this year. In the end, we got 40 solution providers to provide information. We took a look at 23 of them at a pretty extensive level, and then we did a deep dive, spent a lot of time on the phone. Demos, if you've ever sat through a demo, this team sat through a lot of demos. We had to give them 6 months off just to recover. And then we interviewed 7 of the executives. What do you think? What's happening? What's coming up? Where is it going? So here's a few of the, actually, this should be all of the logos for all of the companies that were featured in the 2019 review. Now, there's been some acquisitions and changes here. Some have gone away, others have grown, like Benevity. At the time, I think we were working with them. They were worth $250 million. It turned into $1 billion. Salesforce was just sort of getting their feet on the ground. In fact, you'll see that reflected in this report. And then Blackbaud acquired YourCause between this report and now. Downloads, we had, this is interesting, more interesting to me. So this is me bragging for a second, so just go get a drink or whatever. So we had 750-ish downloads in the first 5 weeks. That's pretty good. We knew that we had broader distributions because people were distributing them. They download it and share it with others. 1,600 downloads so far. With continually, every week, we get more and more downloads. What we know is, looking at the audience, we have over 1,000 technology providers of some type. So this is multiple people at multiple companies downloading. So we know that the tech teams are using this as part of their pitch, their sales team, their strategy thinking. 400 CSR managers from 652 companies around the world. So the companies are a little bit bigger because it wasn't always a CSR manager downloading it. Sometimes it's just people who had different job descriptions. And here you can see what's the distribution of that. North America obviously had the most, South America 20%, and so on and so forth. That's the geography. And then the audience, we have all these practitioners, but nonprofits also want to understand, how should we be interacting? Because a key problem right now, a big bottleneck, is I'm a nonprofit. I want to be seen. I'm going to pause for, oh, perfect. Whoever's on the mute, love it. The nonprofit says, I want to put my opportunity to give and volunteer on these platforms. So here we go. Wait, how many platforms are there? How often do I have to update it? 50, 60? I don't have time for this, right? So that's a problem. Getting the opportunities onto these platforms is a huge issue. Now, what's happened is Volunteer Match has been driving the back end for, I think, 5 or 6 now. Bright Funds, Benevity, a number of others, CSR, YourCause, providing that data, but they're still hungry for more. But that is a bottleneck that we've not figured out yet. And 84% of CSR managers, we did do a survey, 84% of CSR managers have recommended this to one of their peers at another company. So for us, we needed that to be over 80%. It is, so hopefully we can keep that up with this year's version. As with last time, you're going to see us talk a lot more about this going into July when it is officially launched. We're going to be providing more open access presentations, going to be doing some press releases and even podcasts. And this, with Foundation for the Carolinas and E4E, is the first go at it. So this is like, nobody's heard anything about this. So you guys are in the know here. There are 4 basic sections. Let's go through this. This is section 1 is a typical market analysis. So you'll see some trends. We do a little bit of analysis here, but a lot of it is just straight up data. Then we get into the feature solutions. This is just what the tech companies told us. We are not doing a comparison. We are not doing any grading. We're never going to get into this. This is just what they told us they do. And then we have comparatively to what our standard of, let's say, disaster relief is. They have to meet 3 or 4 criteria to qualify for a full circle, or as you can see, goes around, and this one qualified for a half circle. So that's all that is. And then solution spotlights, the 17 companies we did a deep dive. We're going to do a deep dive with 17 companies this time around. Some of them are going to be different, and I think there's probably more than 17. This final section, what to expect, is probably the most interesting to both nonprofits and CSR managers because it provides a little bit more of a, here's what we're seeing. We have a technical writer with a lot of background, and we have a leadership council as part of the Institute that speaks into this. So this is not just Chris Jarvis saying this or that. The other thing, in fact, very little of my opinion got into this report. I don't want to talk about that. That hurt my feelings. So we're going to go on. Okay, anybody have a question or a comment for us right here? Anything? Let me check in. Julie, anything that I missed?
No,
Anything?
you're good to go.
We're all good. Okay, let's dive in. 2020 edition is coming in July 2021, but first let's look at how far we've come so far. Okay, remember last time we had, what was it, 60 some? We're at 98 CSR managers have filled out a survey. They don't really get anything for doing this. It takes half an hour at least. They've got to go find this information. It's a real pain. So these folks who did this, and some of you may be on the call, are troopers. I really appreciate people giving their insights, providing this data. It's all anonymous. We do not name the companies nor the individuals who contributed. So there's not even any fame in this. They just did it, and we really appreciate that. We've got 88 companies. The reason is we have more managers than companies this time is because we asked for managers at the same company in different parts of the world, because the perspective isn't always the same. We felt that was more realistic. 14 countries, it's more than last time, double, and then 3.4 million employees represented so far. So these numbers will grow. As you can see, we have an overrepresentation in the US and Canada in terms of who's filling it in, but that's typically because when it comes to this kind of thing, that's where most of the action is happening right now. What's interesting so far is that the 5,000 to 10,000 size company is the biggest contributor. And that's a change for us. That is saying that it's kind of becoming normative for smaller companies, obviously with big revenues still, but with a smaller employee count to start adopting technology like this. So it's not just for the big, massive, hundreds of thousand target type companies. So we're going to be featuring 60 platforms this year. There will be broader global representation, as you see already. We're going to spotlight 20, not 17. And we're going to be adding some more features. For example, if employee funds to support employees, we'll have a section in here this year. That is we have found in the research, this comes from way back in the day. He's got a podcast. I know him really well. I can't remember. He's got a good podcast on workplace information. His name's going to pop into my head later. But he did a bunch of research about how when employees are able to support or help their colleagues through these types of funds, it is one of the most significant factors in legitimizing a company's position on community investment, environmental. It just legitimizes and authenticates it. I don't know, Mark Wahlberg, his name is in my head and I can't get rid of it, and that is not who I'm talking about. And we are also going to do a nonprofit perspective in this version as well. We are going to have obviously because of COVID, a focus on remote employee engagement. So we're going to look at platforms that do it. What we found is most of the big players do not have the native ability to facilitate virtual volunteering online. You kind of have to go to the nonprofit. That's fine. That's not a judgment. It's just we're going to call out those kinds of items in terms of ways that these companies, these solution providers can innovate and grow. We're going to talk about the volunteering giving opportunities. We've done some research. We have been vetting online volunteering opportunities by going and volunteering with all of them. We're up to 640 so far. Don't even ask me how these volunteers do this, but 640 legitimate, real online volunteering opportunities where they seem to know what they're doing. And we're running out. So that's another area of growth and opportunities to invest more in the private sector to actually can sync up with the ability of these platforms and what they're capable of doing. And just really quickly, if you're wondering where are we at with this, publication date is slated for July. We're in the report build data analysis. So right now we're trying to collect information feedback from the people at companies who use these platforms. So we have to go through the CSR manager to get a survey out to people. So if that's you on this call, I need to follow up with you and get that survey. Your employees can win a free iPad. Their name goes in. Now this time, see, you're not going to believe me, but this time I'm actually telling the truth. I'm lying to you, but I'm telling the truth about this, but I was lying that you could win one. It's all very confusing. But I'd love to get 2,000 responses to that from around the world. So if you think, you know what, Chris, I'm feeling generous. I'd like to help you and the world out with this. I'd love that. Okay, so we're at a pause here. If you're on video, because you really want to win that fake iPad, you can raise your hand and I'll call you out if you have a question or a comment or a query. Or you can put it in the chat box. I don't see the chats moving at all here. Anybody? Just checking in with people? No. Okay. So my question to you is, and honestly, you have to say this, is the number of platforms that we found, 51, last time we're shooting for 60, is that more or less? We're going to do a chat poll, so it's not even a proper poll. Is that more or less than you thought was available? These are platforms that facilitate employee giving and or volunteering and or grant making, but they have to involve employee giving or volunteering. It's more, right? Way more. I know. It's crazy how many of these platforms are out there and their capabilities. Some of the European platforms are weirdly sophisticated. And there may be a case that could be made to say, I'm going to use a North American platform in North America, but I'm going to use a French platform in France because they can help me get. So in France, when your employees volunteer, you can get 60% of their base salary back as a charitable credit to your corporate taxes. I did not know that. Why don't we do that in the United States? 60% of lawyers' fees coming back to the firm as a tax credit? Are you kidding me? That's awesome. They know about that. That's built into their platform. They account for it. GDPR, this is the European Union technical privacy law. They can account for that. So we're just creating awareness so that companies have the option to be a little bit more agile in how they roll these platforms out. It may not be a one and done approach yet. You may want to consider going more broadly. In other cases, some platforms have got that figured out. Okay. And for all of those, Beth, Margaret, Michael, Melissa, Ali, and Sean, and Julie, Paula, Madeline. I sound like I'm on a kid's show, Mr. Rogers calling out names. I just want to say thank you for putting those answers in the chat box and just say that I see that. I appreciate that. Okay, let's do the trends comparison. So which program does your organization have in place that currently supported by technology? So I'm going to run you through a number of slides here. And we're going to do a compare and contrast between 2020 answers and 2019 answers, okay? What we're looking for are significant changes or things that are the same. If they're the same, maybe that's just the state, that's the baseline, right? And if we see a change down the road, that'll be significant. But right now, it's kind of the way things are. And this slide seems to indicate that in terms of how people use it, giving or gift matching, volunteering, grant making. So you can see the bigger ones, 2020, the smaller ones, 2019. I need you to get this slide right because we're going to giddy up and go here a little faster as we go along. Okay. How long has your organization been using the current platform? Now, you can see it's basically the same. 0 to 1 years is less. And we feel that's because as adoption rates increase, we're going to have fewer people contributing who are going to say, this is my first time, right? The other thing I want to say is out of the almost 100 people who participated in the survey so far, 2/3 of them are new. So it's not the same people giving the same answers year over year, although that would account for some of the change. So basically what's interesting is it's basically besides that 0 to 1 year, it looks pretty similar. Okay, so that's interesting. And that's interesting because it says that there's not a lot of new people signing up for these platforms, filling out our survey anyways. Are you considering pursuing a switch to a new vendor? Yes was bigger before. It seems to getting smaller, but the unsure cannot say looks big, but that's because we combine undecided, unsure the same. So it's kind of very similar to what we saw before. So the market seems to be about as hot as it was. It's not hotter. It doesn't seem to be cooling off. So if you are going to switch, why? Okay, so this one is interesting. Again, the bars are almost identical here. What was the reason for switching to the new platform? Some people said functionality. That's number one. That's always been number one. Number two is going to be customer service and support, and then vendor technical expertise. So for vendors, when they download this, and I don't use that in a derogatory term, vendor, it's just easier to say than technology solution provider. When they are reading this platform, here's the opportunity. Get out in front of functionality so people know what it actually does. But if you want to strengthen your current client base, you need to be investing in customer service and support and the technical expertise. And what's funny is when we talk to the people who fill the survey, they don't always just mean understanding code. They mean technical expertise in terms of even getting people to use it, interventions that work to get people to try the platforms. And that's where technology platforms tend to be a little thin, although they are building out some consulting expertise in these areas. It's also a place where your local foundation might be able to step in and help as well. Just saying. Did switching platforms increase or decrease utilization? Interestingly, increased. Okay, and again, the graph is almost identical. So we're going to say, okay, that's what we would expect. That's pretty baseline. Did switching platforms increase or decrease satisfaction? Again, pretty much the same as 2019. So again, this is kind of baseline as well. How long did it take to obtain leadership buy-in to move forward with technology? Now we're getting into sort of an interesting area. Typically, when we talk to CSR managers and they talk about, look, if we can get, I hear people are using Benevity, cyber grants, whatever it may be, Moving Worlds, Bright Funds. If we had a platform like that, our program would explode. Maybe. But it has very little to do with the technology. But before we even have that conversation, we want to sort of help people understand how long this process takes. And so we ask specific questions, and we're going to go through them to help CSR managers set expectations for what this is going to cost you in terms of an investment of your team and your time, how long, who's involved. That's what we're going to go through right now. So if you're involved in this directly, this is for you. If you're thinking about switching, this is what you should know. And if you're on the nonprofit side or you're associated and you're looking to partner with organizations, if the company seems to be distracted for a period of time, this could be why. Okay, so let's pull back the curtain and see what we're looking at. How long did it take you to get leadership buy-in? So you've been talking about it, sending emails, memos. Hey, you know what? If I had something more than an Excel spreadsheet and a napkin, I might be able to grow up the program the way you think I should. So I'm suggesting we do an RFP, back and forth, 1 month. Okay, good number of people said 1 month, 2 to 3 months. That's looking a little bit more, 4 to 6 months. That's the most. So people are saying between 2 and 6 months just to get a leader to say, okay, go check it out. All right, good. Here we go. The 24 months, terrifying, but it's in there. We put it in there. Okay. How long? So that's step one, right? So 2 to 6 months for that first one. So let's say 4. We'll split the difference. How long was the procurement process from the point of the RFP? You got permission from the CEO or whoever it is. You send out the RFP to how many organizations? How long is that RFP process? again, the graphs are pretty similar as before. You'll see we changed the numbers a little bit. So if you account for that, they're almost identical. Again, between 2 and 6 months. Let's split the difference, even though I think it's higher towards the higher 6 months, but we'll say 4 months again. So 4 months to get a leader to say yes, 4 months for the RFP process. But wait, there's more. Who was involved in shortlisting the platforms? Companies, and here's the little thing, companies that said, you know what, we just went and hired a third party, they're always going to go faster, always. Third party is always going to go faster. There's some behavioral science reasons for that. Your boss is always going to trust an outsider more than they're going to trust you for their expertise, whatever. This is just human cognitive bias, doesn't matter, we won't get into that. That's another webinar. So if you outsource, it's going to go faster. If you partner partnering with a third party is going to go faster. Partnering with internal, it's going to take longer. CSR equivalent, we can do it on our team. I know what I know. That's the biggest group. And I would say that's the biggest reason for the timing that you're about to see, because we've only seen part 1 and part 2, leadership buy-in and RFP, and we're up to 8 months. So let's keep going. What departments were involved in the selection decision? Okay, we're going to do this in-house. Who was involved? CSR, obviously, corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship. Business analysts, that has grown. IT is more involved. We're going to ask some questions as to why that is, but that's a significant departure between 2019 and 2020. Enterprise architects, but the same, meaning is it going to fit with everything else that we're doing? Legal, they're always involved in everything. HR is getting more involved. That's interesting. CSR and HR don't always talk together. They don't always go get a beer and bowl afterwards. But now it seems on this topic, they're doing a little bit more together. Procurement, they're in everything. You can't get rid of them. Necessary evil. Public relations. This blip went from nothing to something. And we think that is probably, as well as we think that some of what was in diversity inclusion ended up being in public relations in this year's version. So instead of clicking DEI, they click public relations because it's becoming more of presenting who we are to the community issue. So they're more involved. And the corporate foundation, that's just a variance of who filled it out. Okay, so there's a few departments to get involved. How many platforms did you compare before selection? 1 platform, you kind of knew what you wanted, so you just went after it. That's fair. 2 to 4 platforms, that's better. You see the 5 to 10, that's the number we want to see shrink. People were doing 5 to 10 platform RFPs and demos and burning up a lot of vendor time and burning up a lot of their time, expanding the timeline. It is great to see that number coming down. You really shouldn't, if you do the upfront work, be vetting less 4 platforms at the most. But that comes from having tools like this that you can use. So we're happy to take some credit for shrinking that distance between 5 to 10 and 2 to 4. Which of the below steps, if any, did you undertake to conduct due diligence on the shortlist? So you've got your 4 platforms. What did you do? Okay, so these, again, almost identical. So there's not much to say here other than this provides, hopefully for the reader, a nice list of things that they may want to walk into procurement or legal with and say, here's what we know we need to do. Here are the steps we need to take. Here's the team we need to form, and here's the timeline we believe we're going to have. So this helps with a little bit of that. What was the total duration of time between the date of technology selection to go live date? Now remember, now we're back on the timeline. We had 4 months for leadership buy-in, 4 months for RFP. Total selection time, 1 to 3 months. So this, I need to explain this a little bit. The date of technology selection to go live date is to say, okay, we are going with your cause or Salesforce. Great, sign the agreement. Now we're going to go live. How long? Most vendors can go live in 30 to 60 days. Not a problem. They know what they're doing. It goes longer because companies begin to fumble the ball a little bit, not because they're incompetent or dumb or anything like that. It is just because there's so many people speaking into it, and the path to implementation is not clearly laid out on the CSR side. A lot of us are doing this for the first or second time. I don't have any technical ability, so I have to talk to other people. There's tons of approvals. Everybody seems to be approving a platform that they don't have any direct responsibility for. So all of that is kind of going into this. So 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, we're going to split it at 6 months, but really 8 would be more honest. So if you don't mind, I'm going to use the 8-month number. So it's 4, 4, and 8. Okay, so now we're at 16 months to the go live date. And remember, go live is just flipping the switch and say, it's working. Yay. Companies will have champagne, invite the vendor, we'll all do it online, we'll celebrate the streamers and everything. And then somebody will say, what's next? All right, now the real work starts. 16 months gets to the real work. But before we do that, how easy was it to implement the platform? Like that process from flipping it to signing the agreement to flipping it on. It would be moderate to somewhat easy. Though those bars are getting a little bigger, we condensed the bars a little bit, which is great. Again, that providers are getting smarter at this. They're streamlining it. They're building out their teams. They know how to talk about the space. They're getting more involved. They're actually hiring CSR managers to come on their teams. So all of this means that when they work with you, implementation is getting better incrementally. And we expect this. If you're filling out a survey and you're mad about how long it took, this is where you're going to say it. How easy was it to implement? It was horrible. It was difficult, extremely difficult, but that number shrunk. So that's good. This I would say is really an objective response, objective observation. How long did it take to implement the platform? Okay, so now we get to it's on, we've had our champagne streamers. Now we want people to start using it. That's what we mean by implementation. 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months. So we're going to say 8 more months here before we really see the traction of people starting to use it, going online, agreeing to terms of use, that kind of thing. So 16 plus 8 puts us just over 2 years. So we could shrink that back down, account for variances, and we'll say you should be looking at 24 months from the day you wake up and think, I am sick to death of napkins and Excel sheets, to the day you can say, people are using it. And it's right around this time that you'll begin to wonder, should we use another platform? So that's a bad thought. Just push that down. It's going to be the same with the next platform. Just take a lap. Okay, so here's the insight. Few practitioners pursue a fully costed business case, cost to benefit, when thinking about this. This report will outline the cross-team functionalities you should have, a basic roadmap, things to consider, who the players are, a function-to-function true comparison that you should be looking at. This hopefully will shrink. Our goal is to shrink that 24 plus month from the day you want to do it to the day it's actually useful to you down inside of a year. That's the goal. Cut that time in half. Those 12 months, the burn rate, the amount of money companies are spending on all of this churn, rather than getting money into the community and doing the job, is huge. And so this report, if we're wondering why we're doing this, we're trying to cut that time at least in half, and that's what we're doing here. All right, gonna go to the chat. Do most reevaluate after 3, and do companies tend to change or move from vendor to vendor? We saw a lot of companies bouncing between vendors. We do see that still. Case in point, I know a company, a very large company, international company, after spending 12 months with a vendor and all of the costs involved with that, flushed it and started over the journey again. And they're 12 months into the new one. They're doing better. We're working with them. So that's good. But after year 3, I would say that's about the time you're at a conference with your solution provider and you're going, I don't think so. Like, maybe, should we be looking? It's just, it's kind of a combination of a couple of things. One is the technology in this space is growing and smarter, but it needs to start taking into account more of the actual human behavior in the real world away from the platform. And that's hard to do as a technology provider. That's really on the shoulders of the CSR departments. And on the other side of things, the new innovation that's coming out, man, oh man, it's meant to grab your attention, make you think, well, this could be better. They're doing that better. This is better. And it's probably true. So it's both of, there's multiple pressures around both of those, but that's what, yeah, I would say year 3, you begin to wonder, did I make the right choice? Giving or gift matching donation exchange, 3 to 5 years, not an ideal to switch. but if it is more functional for both us and the user, then it makes the most sense. Okay, I'm gonna ask Jill Cole just to come off mute. Could you speak into that a little bit for us?
I got trigger happy and was that's the reason there. I was answering the questions as you were reading them and realized what I was doing. But yes, I was paying deep attention and answering the questions. So my apologies for the trigger finger. But yes, we use donation exchange and have had it for 5 years.
Okay, so you've been with them for 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
And donation exchange, I don't think, they do gift matching and giving. Do they do facilitate employee volunteering as well?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
Okay, good. Well,
Or we haven't at least used it for that purpose.
Okay. So no, we're not officially saying they do or they don't, but I'm going to make sure they're on our list as well. So Jill, thank you so much for speaking into this and
No
for
problem.
coming on mute. Margaret, is cost the biggest obstacle to obtaining leadership buy-in? Not typically. It's whether your job actually is worth investing in more. So I say that in a safe space, I hope. But what it means is that sometimes the higher up you go in a company, the less they understand the critical role that this kind of work plays in both brand and culture. So I think we see leadership becoming more and more aware of the importance of this, but now it's a matter of syncing up what the value is with what the investment should be, because these platforms are not cheap. They can be incredibly expensive. And so making a strong business case really helps with that leadership buy-in. But to make the business case, you kind of have to know what the timeline is, who should be involved, what the extent is, and what the return on that investment should be. And hopefully this technology review can help with that. But cost alone is typically not the biggest. It's not how much it costs, it's whether it demands the attention to actually make a decision on it, if you know what I mean. Like I'll come back to that later, but we already have a payroll giving program kind of thing. Good question. Thanks for asking it. Julie Caldwell. Now I know who asked that question. Okay, great. What percentage of your total, okay, so let me go back for just a second here. And I just want to be conscious of the time. Employee activity on platforms. Let's talk about that. So when we get a platform, what are we looking at in terms of actions on the part of our employees for the intended use of these platforms? So the first question we're going to look at is what percentage of your total, and these are not all the questions in the report, by the way. These are just a selection that E4E and Foundation for the Carolinas and we went through that we thought were most salient for this presentation. So there's a lot more in there. But what percentage of your total employee base activated as users, i.e. signed up and logged in? I want to pause for a second and say most technology providers will count a user as somebody who logged in, agreed to terms of service, created a profile, checked it out, just one action. They will count that as a user. And so if you're a technology provider, not all of them do this, but if they said, look, typically within 6 months, we have a 50% user base of the total employee population, this is what they mean, okay? That is not what we mean by utilization. So I'm gonna explain that in a second. So this is just, I logged in and just at a minimum, click the box. Maybe I did more, but that's the minimum. And you can see the answers there. 1% of total employee base, so it's 8% of the responses. The biggest chunk is going to be down on unsure, cannot say. That's disappointing since it's the one thing your platform should be able to tell you is how many users you have. So we're going to look into that a little bit more, but we think that's probably, we're not going to tell you, okay? And then 31 to 50% of the total employee base is the largest single category. 11 to 20 is also there. But you're looking between 10 and 50%. You've got 10, 20, 25%, and the rest is going to fall below 10% and just a little bit above it. Okay, above 50%. Engaged, performs 3 or more transactions before a year. Now, that's what we mean. When we say use rate or engaged on a technology platform, we're talking about 3 transactions. I signed up to volunteer 3 times. I signed up to give 3 times. I signed up to do something that involved me doing something in the real world apart from just hitting a button here. That's 3 transactions per year, and excluding agreeing to terms and conditions, making a profile, etc. So we're trying to make a completely different question here. Now you'll see that 10% or less, we're looking at just over 30%, and then 10% to 50%, we're looking at 10, 20, 30, about 30% as well. Okay. Over 50%, the numbers drop off precipitously. And again, 90 to 100%, we're going to look into that a little bit more, because that seems to indicate that we wouldn't have expected anybody to answer that one. So it's either small companies or something else going on there. So we have to figure that out. But anecdotally, even the technology solution providers would say in terms of employees really using these platforms, you should expect after go live date, first 2 to 3 years, about 6 to 8% of your employees, your total population base. So that's for 100,000 employees, you're looking at 6 or 8% using it. So if you're paying for one of these platforms based on your total employee count, you need to do the math to say, I'm paying 50 cents per employee per month, but only 6 or 8% are really going to use it once we get going in a way that would justify those costs. So maybe some negotiation opportunities for companies there, I'm not sure. Obviously, the real opportunity is to increase those numbers, and that's what we're all about. Occasionally, performs 1 or 2 transactions per year. You can see it's breaking down very similarly to the previous slide. Dormant performs no transactions. So now we need to reconcile that 50% or more is about 20% of the respondents, and then 50% of less, obviously, is the 80%, less than 30. So there's a large number and less than 50%, but it's about kind of split there. I think if I'm doing my math correctly here, 10, 20, 30, about 40% down there too. Again, when you're making your business use case for leadership, knowing this in advance in terms of a benchmark across this many companies around the world, you can speak with confidence to say, we expect this much use within year 1, this much use in year 2, and this much use in year 3. It will cost this much, and here's why we think the cost to benefit ratio is good here. That is very compelling when you can say, and it is based on these benchmarks, published benchmarks kind of thing. You're liable to get buy-in a lot quicker. Victor Lee, what in the world time is it in Australia?
I'm sorry, I've got a time difference wrong. It's 5 a.m. Good to see you, Chris.
There's a committed individual. He's in the report, Communicares, a good organization, takes a really good holistic approach, including not only the tech, but also how human beings behave in the real world. And he's willing to get up at 5 a.m. and get on a call. And yes, Julie Caldwell, it was Adam Grant that I was trying to think of. Thank you. I'm sure you've read that research as well, seeing as you're in the biz. How are end users trained on the platform, on the new platform? Okay, here's a real opportunity for tech companies, but also a responsibility for CSR managers. Sometimes when we get the go live date and we roll it out, we send emails and that's all we do. Or we put it in the mouth of our CEO and that's all we do. The hands-on support is the make or break difference between a 6 to 8% utilization rate. And again, we're talking about at least 3 transactions a year, and really getting your money's worth out of this platform and getting more activity into the community. The more companies can support and training, and we don't mean training every employee how to use it. You actually only need to train your champion network, champion ambassador network, a leader network, volunteer employee leader network. They will do the heavy lifting to get their small groups on board and understanding, but you need to run them through a basic training, not only of the tech, which guys like Victor can do for you, but also how it fits into the bigger program. How does it fit into what we're doing more broadly? So for example, we've done training for the we help build the champion network. I guess that's the first step, but training the champion network for a large Silicon Valley based organization around the world. And they have 2,500 I think at least certified champions who understand how to use their platform and get other people logging their hours as well. And so their utilization rate is an exception, and they're probably screwing up our results here a little bit. Okay. Okay, no problem. I totally understand. And he's probably gone already. What results or metrics do you, when I talk like that, I'm reading the chat just to let everybody else know, because if you're on the phone, you're like, this guy has a lot of voices in his head. I'm actually just responding to the chat there verbally, because typing, I can't walk and chew gum anymore. What I said that on a call today with somebody in Europe, and they were like, I don't know what that expression means. He was German. What results or metrics do you measure using the platform? So everybody's going to measure program activities and program outputs. It gets stickier when we get down to impacts and outcomes. I'll tell you why, because outcomes and impacts are really hard to measure in a quantifiable way. Outputs is what we should be after. And if we have a proper logic model, we know that these outputs, this many hours, this many organizations, this much money, this much time, this many people, is reasonably going to lead to these benefits for the employees, these benefits for the company, and these benefits for the community. But the platform itself will have a hard time quantifying benefits to those three groups. So the more solid we get on how an output leads to a benefit, and this is using the catalog's logic model, which is pretty standard, then you can look at those outputs which the platforms are going to be excellent at giving you, and you can drive more insight out of those inputs leading to outcomes, and then the short and long-term impacts. And impacts is how the world is different, because we all benefited from these actions that came from 10,000 hours kind of thing. So we need to go, but the responsibility here, to be honest, is on the CSR manager or the corporate citizenship space. Were you a part of any user groups related to your platform? Now this is very interesting. I would love to ask this question, but I'm not going to. Anybody thinking of getting a technology platform, leaving napkins and Excel to get a platform? If you are, you should know that there are two kinds of groups that you will likely want to be a part of. One is an official user group or client group. The vendor, your technology provider, will provide a group where you can come and share ideas and kind of inform the roadmap going forward. These are the things that are most pressing. This is what we need to do. What technology providers, and I totally understand why this is a consternation for them, are the guerrilla or the hidden groups. And this is where we go and say what we really think. So both exist. And if I'm in this one, I'm eventually going to be in this one as well. This one is the real insight. And obviously it can be a bit of a gripe session and that kind of thing. But these groups typically will give you the raw info. It's not always the truest version of things. It's very emotional, but there are two groups. And what we found is, yep, people who use these technology platforms do belong to both, and they do know about both. And so for the solution providers, this again is an opportunity for innovation and insight to create a feedback loop there. So the insight here, before we go to questions again, if you've got a question, you're on video, you can raise your hand, you can throw it in the chat box. But the insight from this section I want to throw out there is that employees choose causes based on personal interests and values. Now, we didn't talk about that specifically in any of the section, but I promise you the thing that's driving utilization versus stagnation on these platforms or plateauing is the ability of the employees to bring their own values and choice into the process. Can I sign up my nonprofit that I love? How hard is that going to be? Can I find something that I like to do? Can I do it in my way? The more I can do it my way, the McDonald's way of thinking, the more excellent the platform is going to be perceived by both the user and the CSR manager. So when companies say, you know what, we're going to focus on STEM education, perfect, great, but don't throw everybody else out of the boat. If they love dogs, let them love dogs on your platform. Just do it in a way where you're not giving maybe as much spotlight or as many resources to that, but the platforms can accommodate all of this. Most of them can accommodate all of this, and to really get your money out of them and to see people use them the way you hope they're going to use them. Choice is the underlying issue that's really driving interest in these platforms, and I think success on the platforms. Hands up, anybody? Call, question? Even from my colleagues, Deviri, Julie, anything? No? Okay. We'll have some open Q&A right at the end, and we'll mix it up. We'll all go open up, bottle of beer, sit back, have a good conversation. I can actually say that because we're all sitting in our basements, right? So we do whatever we want. Okay, COVID-19 and social justice issues in 2020. How did that affect things? That was the wrench that means we did not publish this in November of 2020 like we expected. It's July of 2021. Thank you, COVID. But it also provided an opportunity to look at some interesting things about how these platforms function and what we need to be aware of as we think about technology in this space going forward. So how did your organization leverage your workplace giving and volunteering technology to facilitate COVID-19 responses? So we're going to look at a few slides specific to COVID-19, and then we're going to look at a few slides that are more about social justice. Some people say social unrest, Black Lives Matter for a shorthand, but it's global. So we're looking at social issues that seem to be in our face all the time in 2020, and rightly so. So as you can see here, did you leverage your workplace giving and volunteering technology to facilitate COVID-19? We did not use our platform. Only a few people said that. We tried to curate some volunteering opportunities. A lot of people did that. Facilitated volunteering events using the platform, getting people together, letting people to know about it. Again, not many of these platforms have native ability to do virtual volunteering. We will call out ones that are an exception to that, like Victor's platform. Used it as a tool. I had to say that, otherwise he's going to email me afterwards and say, hey, you remember that? So used it, sorry. Used it, it just makes it more real when I can talk to people. I hope that's okay with everybody. Used it as a tool to engage employees while out of the office. I don't know why that is not 100%. I have no idea why that number is only at 40%. But anyways, allowed employees to find and create volunteering events, so on and so forth. So you can see how people used it. Well, let's see how it affected volunteering, COVID-19. Decrease, like, volunteering activity nosedive. As it related to COVID-19 impacting volunteering on the platform, people are saying, look, it killed it. COVID-19 killed it. Even though we did all the other things on that previous slide, COVID-19 killed it, okay? For some people, it increased. We're gonna look into that a little bit better to understand why. Did it increase or decrease or affect giving? Obviously, it increased it. More people gave. As a result of COVID-19, did you invest in supplemental giving and or volunteering technologies? Most people said, some people said yes, but most people said no. And that's because a lot of people, and we know this from talking to people, they were just like, we're trying to figure out what this means. What are we supposed to do? We're not really set up for virtual volunteering. We don't know who to go to. We don't know if our nonprofits can do virtual volunteering. We're afraid of overwhelming them. There were so many unknowns, and everybody was like, it's broken. I don't want to break it more by trying to help wrong. And so that's a little bit of what's going on here. So the insight is that the majority of companies depended solely on their vendor to facilitate giving and support during the crisis. They were the go-to person. If they didn't have answers, they just sort of pulled back and went into a bit of a holding pattern. Not because they didn't want to help, but they wanted to help in the right way. So the opportunity is, as the primary means of volunteering and giving for employees in most companies, the role and influence of technology platforms is more significant than is typically understood in the philanthropic circle or field. I've been at some Gates Giving, they're doing their conference over 4 months, day events over 4 months. And I would have expected this information to play more into that, given how it was the first place that most CSR managers went when they tried to figure out what should I do, it was to the technology provider. Makes sense, right? What should I do? What do you know? What's happening? Some of those vendors, they just responded so fast and did an incredibly good job of being a partner. Other organizations that are kind of in the ecosystems, like CAF of America, also were able to provide some insights, white papers, and that kind of thing. But the role of these platforms is probably more important than we're thinking in the broad philanthropic field, because they tend to be gatekeepers of knowledge and action for massive companies with a massive amount of money that they want to do something with. So an opportunity to grow that area. Okay, really just to reassure Deviri and Julie here that we're going to get through this. Only a couple slides left. How did your organization leverage your workplace giving and volunteering technology to facilitate the response to social unrest? We did not use it. Again, these graphs, if I could put them next to the COVID graph, about the same. People use their platform in a similar way to understand what should we be doing about the pandemic, what should we be doing about social unrest, in particular in the United States. So from your perspective, did the events impact the level of volunteering? In this case, it increased it. And that's because we found that companies focused on organizations that were addressing social issues. They were there all along, but now we went actively looking for them and we put a spotlight on them, and employees responded. And that goes to what I was saying before in terms of the opportunity, excuse me for a second, that these platforms may be playing a bigger part in a national response to these issues than anybody is really thinking about as the gatekeeper to knowledge and action. So in this case, it increased it. They cannot say unsure is pretty big, but that's because people were saying they went there, but we don't know if it was in response to what was happening in Minneapolis, let's say, or if that was their organization that they chose already. We can't make that determination in this case or that case. But from your perspective, how did the events impact giving? Boom, increased it, as we would have expected. How about grant making? Increased it. And those graphs are about the same. Again, is it the employees leading and the company grant making following, or vice versa? Is a company setting a cadence for here's the norm, and people are saying, I don't know what to do, so the company did it here. I guess they vetted them. I'm going to do that too. So again, company modeling may have influenced what individuals did. All right, that brings us to the end. I'll go to that last slide here and leave that up. And we're going to switch back over to E4E and Foundation for the Carolinas here in just a second. But before we do that, any questions or comments? Again, if you're on video, you get the privilege of just raising your hand and speaking audibly, which is cool, and winning that iPad. But if you want to ask a question in chat, we can do that now.
I'll raise my hand and speak at the same time.
I see.
I have a question for you, Chris.
Sure.
You just talked about increased giving when spotlighting social justice organizations on the platform. But then you also showed a slide about decreased engagement when a company is setting the charitable strategy or charitable mission. And could you kind of reconcile those two seemingly different structures?
One type of giving has more to do with a fight or flight, or the amygdala in our brain. And we're like, okay, something's happening. There's a tornado coming, or tornado went through, action is required. Or should I leave like it's that area of thought. The other one has to do with our identity and values. Oh, the company's picking that. That's great. That lines up with my identity values. I'll participate. But it is not a fight or flight emergency crisis response situation. So I'm actually using two parts of my brain to assess what I'm going to do in response.
All right, thanks.
Victor.
Yeah, hi, from Down Under. Just thought I'd share some insights from here, because we've actually been hit by COVID earlier than you guys, and then started recovering earlier, not necessarily faster. We found that, volunteering stats definitely dropped. We even dropped about 80 to 90% at the peak. And what we found was the blocker is actually around the non-for-profits not being ready to actually go virtual. Yeah. There's an IT lag, for the first 3 months, we couldn't even get in touch with the non-for-profits because they haven't even diverted the phones, let alone working remotely. So what chance have they got in going virtual? So we actually then had to work with our corporate partners and actually started providing services off platform, which is more like a consultation process where we go to each not-for-profit door by door and try to understand what are their blockers. Do they actually need any business help, which converts into skill-based volunteering opportunities? And even the face-to-face ones, we had to get our corporate partners to potentially invest in making the location COVID safe. Because a lot of the not-for-profits couldn't even afford the basic safety gear and to uphold the restriction, and therefore they can't restart the whole volunteering exercise. So that came from literally 3 to 6 months of door knocking and calling, and we were at one stage even sending letters to get in touch with the CEOs who are basically just disconnected from the rest of the world. So that might help boost some of the restarting the engine numbers.
See, and this is a great example, Victor, and thanks for sharing that. I appreciate you joining the call so early and sharing that insight. I have no connection to Victor in any way, other than he's a great guy, and I know him from some work down there, but we're not connected, so there's no conflict of interest here, just in case someone's thinking. But he's thinking about this on behalf of a constellation of companies that are working with him in Australia. So the more insightful, the more empowered he is as the technology provider to take a leadership role in this, and the more he sees himself in the leadership role, the more benefit the companies are going to get out of this, because any CSR manager is managing the inside and outside stuff at the same time. They're just never going to have the point of view of the field that Victor would be able to offer them. So the more he can be elevated in that role, and the more he can give back to the companies, I think the more effective this space will be. E4E is a great example of that. If you've ever wondered, well, how can employees support other employees? Some people will tell you, oh, that's illegal, you can't do that, you can't, that's giving inside of the, Julie knows more about this than probably the IRS does. So yeah, so they play a critical role. And letting them play that role, I think, is really important. A. Morrison said, what do you see as being the next area for giving platforms to move into? That's a really good question. I would say understanding the behavioral science of human beings away from the platform is going to be really important. Like, how do I bring more people to use it? How do I explain the importance of it? How do I get people to show up? Because unless I'm doing that work in the real world, the data that going into these platforms is going to remain minimal, and the use of them won't be understood by people. I think blockchain is probably going to come into play at some point, but I'm over my pay grade with that one. Good question, though. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to A. Morrison's question there? The next big move in giving platforms? Just go ahead and write that in the chat. And with that, and seeing that it's 20 after, maybe I'll surrender the screen, and we can. I'll give it back to Deviry or Julie to land the plane.
Wonderful. And keep the questions coming in as we're landing the plane. We got a little bit of runway over the next couple of minutes. Thank you so much, Chris. E-Free Relief and Foundation for the Carolinas is so pleased to bring everybody together today and have your engagement. So again, take the next couple of minutes to put those questions out there so that we can keep engaging. As we think through future opportunities, as Chris said, you all are getting the first sneak peek of this information. So there's still runway to be able to participate. So if you're a CSR practitioner, you can participate in the survey. It's still open. We're going to provide this information to you so you can graciously give the 30 minutes that Chris talked about of your time to further enrich this information to help your peers. And so that opportunity, and then as we talked about the end user experience as well. So your employees, opportunity to also participate in that survey and be part of what will be the tech review released in July 2021. We heard it here, right, Chris? That you'll actually have all this material together and can download it and have that as your one source of truth of information. And of course, Chris has definitely told you all there's an iPad involved in those two surveys.
There really is, honestly.
This part is true.
Yeah.
For E-Free Relief, we would love to continue the conversation with you about employee relief. We have a number of clients on the line. And it's so wonderful to see you and feel very much, we appreciate the opportunity to support your employees and know that that is a major trust in E-Free Relief, and we're so proud to be in that partnership. We want to be able to provide opportunities to talk about employee relief, disaster relief, what the outcomes are of an impact of the work that's being done. And so one of the next opportunities is the disaster philanthropy trends and future of readiness, relief, and recovery. And so talking about boosting resiliency in the workforce. in communities in crisis. And we're going to be sharing some of our own research that was completed during COVID and what the outcomes of those grants were, of the hundreds of thousands of grants that were provided out during 2020. So information there that we'll share out to you. And certainly, as Chris started out at the beginning, we did a lot of personal following on LinkedIn. Follow the companies as well. So certainly through LinkedIn, Facebook for both Foundation for the Carolinas and E4E Relief. And I'll hand it over to Deviry about other opportunities to stay engaged.
For sure. First, I'd like to say thank you, Chris, for this great presentation and the insights. And we look forward to seeing what else is coming down the pipe, especially as the end users complete the survey, as I'm sure that will give us some even deeper detail as to how these platforms are being used and what employees themselves are looking for. For Foundation for the Carolinas, we don't currently have a corporate offering scheduled, but we will certainly get information out to you all when it is. And same thing for CCAP. We do offer quarterly meetings and monthly, what we call CCAP conversations. So if you're interested in being a part of that, certainly please feel free to let us know and we will reach out to you with that information.
Any other questions from the group?
I had one other item just to underscore. Listen, anywhere in the world, if you can help us get the survey from colleagues using these platforms, that'll just make this report so much more robust for all of us. Love to get that data. Secondly, it's free. Anybody can use it for anything, anywhere, whatever you want to do. And then the other thing is, if you are interested in upskilling your nonprofit organization that you feel like, I don't think they know what they're doing online, they probably don't. For a small donation of $500, we'll take them through a 2-week program, put them in a peer-to-peer learning group, give them all the tools and workbooks that we would give to a company and certify them in the transformative approach. So if you're interested in that, we can do that. I can send some more info about that as well. Just mentioning it because it did come up as an important bottleneck in the process. It's been great to be with everyone. Thank you so much to E4E and Foundation for the Carolinas for hosting this and for supporting this important piece of research. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And we'll get this information out to you. And here's our contact information as well, which will be supplied after the session. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.